Earlier this month, I reconnected with a middle school teacher who'd had a very positive impact on my life, and we got dinner and talked over Thai food for a couple of hours. We probably hadn't really interacted in 15 years, if not more. It was really wonderful reconnecting. I'd recommend it if there's anyone like that in your life that you're debating on reaching out to right now. And I think the only aspect of my life that really surprised my former teacher was the fact that I work so publicly now. YouTube, podcasts, paneling at conventions. Because in 7th grade, when I had this teacher, I was so shy and so timid that I would physically shake sometimes when speaking in front of the class. And internally, I felt very alienated and anxious and unhappy. And then naturally, 8th grade was even worse. This video won't have any spoilers, apart from a couple of notes towards the end after the main review at this timestamp. I had planned to cover 8th grade in a Fake Friends spin-off video, but after watching it, I think it's better suited to a normal review. In reviews, I usually go at least a little into the film's background and show some clips from interviews with the filmmaker, but I've already talked about Burnham and his past work and his ideology a lot, so check out my series Fake Friends if you're interested in that. I also wanted to disclose that I know someone who worked as a PA on this movie. I try to avoid reviewing anything I have any kind of personal connection with and felt obligated to disclose that, but it's not like I know Burnham or Fisher, so I'm reviewing it anyway. This review is also one of my more personal ones, and I'm going to talk about a weird skin condition that I have because the movie made me think about it a lot more than I usually do. So content warning for a little bit of weird body horror medical stuff involving fingernails, and me self-indulgently talking about my own depressing middle school experience. Middle school was absolute hell for me, as it is for most people. On top of the typical nightmare of being corralled in with dozens of other confused human beings in that liminal state between child and teenager, where insecurity and self-consciousness manifest and spread like an infection and are exacerbated by bodies changing, and of course changing at different rates for different kids. Around puberty, I developed plaque psoriasis, which is a chronic autoimmune disease that can manifest in a lot of different ways, which for me meant my fingertips cracked open sometimes, and my fingernails would get little pits in them, or become thick, or become thin and brittle, and lift off the nail bed and come off completely. If you Google psoriasis fingernails or psoriasis fingertips, you'll get an idea. Though many of the photos are more graphic and disturbing than what my fingers usually look like, but in my eyes, my hands looked gross and off-putting, and I would paint my nails or wear band-aids around my fingers all the time to try to hide it, but then people would ask me about the band-aids and I'd be even more self-conscious on top of already being a very, very shy, very, very anxious, quiet weeb kid with frizzed out hair. Also, a few weeks into the school year in 8th grade, my family moved to a way more country area, so I was dealing with not knowing anyone after pretty exclusionary friend groups had already formed and dealing with culture shock. And then a few months into the year, I got mono, and then my dad died in front of me, and then a doctor thought the mono was lymphoma, and then other relatives died, and it was just really bad. The year spanning my 8th and 9th grades was the worst year of my life. Unequivocally. So 8th grade, the movie, was the first time in many years that I really had to engage with 8th grade, the communal hell experience that was exacerbated, for me, by a huge cultural adjustment and death and skin disorders. I would describe Burnham's 8th grade in seemingly contradictory terms. It reads as a very specific and very authentic representation of the modern day experience of being 13 or 14 in 2017 America, the presence of electronics, and of feeling the need to perform for a social media audience at a young age especially. And it was an authentic representation of that communal experience of adolescence and insecurity and desperation and embarrassment and dread that is as true for protagonist Kayla Day as it was for me, as it was for my parents. In some ways, it was even more relatable for me because of how terminally shy I was, and in 8th grade, having a single parent like Kayla does in the film, while in other ways, I felt like more of an objective observer. Maybe this is, in part, that generational difference. I was so lonely and I wanted friends so badly, but outside of hoping people on the internet like my One Piece fan art, I didn't want an audience. Especially an audience for me, the person, or even for original art and comics that I filled notebooks with as a teenager, but never posted anywhere, versus the fan drawings I did as a means of participating in a larger fan community. I didn't even post a photo that had my face in it online until I was like 17. I think it was of me dressed as Sean for Halloween, rather than a normal selfie or a candid. While 8th grade isn't as as overtly related to parasocial interactions as a film like Ingrid Goes West is, I felt a similar sadness watching Kayla to how I felt watching the Jacksepticeye clips I used in Fake Friends 2. And knowing that the pressure Kayla feels in the film to perform and put herself on display is even more universally applied now than it was when I was her age. Our culture punishes shyness and forces Kayla, who is an introvert, to repeatedly lie and perform and pretend to be someone she isn't. And characters, children and adults, are constantly obsessing over what it means to be cool and projecting their insecurities onto each other. 8th grade is about a specific transitional period and a desire for love and attention and community, but it's also about mental health, specifically anxiety. Burnham is public about his struggles with anxiety, and the film has an accurate, unflinching, and relatable approach to mental health issues. Apart from that, and some very subtle jabs at his frequent targets, such as late-night talk shows, I was surprised and impressed by how much of a deviation this is from Burnham's previous work, and that it is not loud or ostentatious, but instead subtle and naturalistic. And Burnham himself, and his usual flamboyant confrontational soapbox, are nowhere to be seen or heard. Unless that was him doing background voiceover in the sex ed video. It sounded like him, but I wasn't sure. I don't know. And instead, his concerns are expressed through a timid young girl and a timid young girl's experience. Formally, there are some impressive long shots and some instances of lovely shot composition, and the acting is universally great. And other times, the budget and directorial inexperience and maybe hesitancy show a little bit, though not enough to detract from the film. I had seen the pilot of Zach Stone Is Gonna Be Famous, Burnham's MTV show, which has a lot in common with 8th grade, but 8th grade is so much more nuanced and mature and impactful. It's a small, intimate, independent film that blows Zach Stone out of the water. And while it's not necessarily a step up from Burnham's more mature comedy work like Make Happy, it's certainly a step in a different, more serious direction. And I hope one where he's found more creative fulfillment that may have been previously lacking. 8th grade didn't move me to tears the way it did for others, but it was still very affecting. It made me feel joy and dread, and most of all, a real sense of empathy. Watching Kayla struggle with her anxieties is painful, but I loved how ambitious and how resilient she was. And it was nice to look at the universality of the 8th grade experience, separated from my own trauma and my own baggage. And I think the movie, as I watched it, helped me see some of the good in that pretty bad period of my life that I had not previously taken the time to consider. And for that, I'm really grateful. The plot points that I didn't want to talk about in the main script because they were spoilers were the way the movie handled sexual assault, which I thought was very, very well done. And that's obviously the most uncomfortable scene in the whole movie. And for good reason. I think it's a scene that a lot of people can relate to that wish they couldn't relate to it. And I'm definitely among those people. And I also thought it was really funny. I wrote down in my notes, when I was in 8th grade, I actually went to a sleepover and no one was bullying me or being awful, but I was very shy and I didn't want to talk to anyone and I wasn't having fun. And I called my mom to pick me up and she was like, are you okay? Is anyone being mean to you? And I was like, I just want to leave. And I wrote that down before the film got to the point where Kayla called her dad to pick her up, and I thought that was funny. I was also really happy that at the end of the movie, Kayla does seem happier in a realistic way of her maturing and figuring things out, and hopefully finding healthier outlets and healthier people to be around. I was gonna say too, it's so funny to think of how self-conscious I used to be about my psoriasis and other problems, and how it doesn't bother me at all now. If my fingernails look gross, they just look gross, I don't care. And it made me think about how much more I like myself now than I used to, and how much happier I am now than I used to be. But I didn't want to talk about that in the main review because that kind of gives away the Kayla's arc and the end of the movie and everything like that. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting me on Patreon or Ko-fi. I also have merchandise up. I have other video essays, other reviews. I'm on an actual play podcast. If you enjoy tabletop RPG podcasts, and thanks.